The Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.
Welcome to the Provoke Media Podcast. I am Diana Marzalek, and I am joined today by AJ Jones, who is the Chief Strategic and Corporate Communications Officer at Monumental Sports and Entertainment. That's the company behind the Washington Capitals, Wizards, and Mystics, among other sports properties, and we will certainly talk more about that. Before Monumental, AJ held senior communications and marketing roles at Starbucks, Vanda Pharmaceuticals, and Versant, giving you, AJ, the perspective from both the brand and sports sides of the business. So I am very happy to have this conversation with you. Last time we spoke, you were at Starbucks, and you've made a monumental change yourself. So we have all new stuff to talk about.
Well, yeah, no, it's wonderful. Thank you so much, Diana. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here on the podcast, and then more importantly, to talk about all the wonderful things that are going on in the world of sport, and specifically the ways in which Monumental is leading in those efforts. I would be remiss to say I was so grateful for all the times that we've been able to share and to talk and to catch up, both in my time at Starbucks and now over here at Monumental. And I'm looking forward to many future engagements as we look at the incredible rise and expansion of not only sports, but quite frankly, the melding of sports, entertainment, and engagement across not only brands and sponsorships, but also in terms of fandom and platforms. And so just looking forward to that. Thanks so much again for the time.
No, of course. And I'm not, I don't know all the nuances of sports, but I do love the topic in terms of, the athletes becoming brands, and and sport is just such an integral part of, especially in this country, of our culture. So there's many ways and many things to talk about, but I figure today we'll get the conversation started.
That'd be great. That'd be great. No, I agree with you. And, and it's something I was sharing a bit earlier with a couple of colleagues of mine, which is the rise of sport now has become the vehicle for not only brands, but also for the new way people think about entertainment. In fact, it is not unheard of where today your most prominent entertainers, particularly within music or others, are looking at sport as a way of launching their new campaign, their new concert, their new tour. For those who historically remember, Beyonce launched her Cowboy Carter tour, if you will, as a part of her performance at the Super Bowl. Similarly situated, you could think about Bad Bunny and the fact that he had more views at the Super Bowl in terms of his halftime show than the Super Bowl entirely. And so I just think what you're seeing just in today's society is the way in which sport has become the vehicle and the entree for not only the way in which we engage and entertain people, but quite frankly, how brands can reposition themselves or artists can engage in segmented audience profiles that may in the past may have been harder to reach.
And is that new, or are there fundamental changes that are sort of reshaping the business and how the sports business is and the larger entertainment business is sort of interacting or co-producing, or however we want to say it?
Sure.
I mean, like Super Bowl ads and the Super Bowl show has been forever, right? And we see a lot of people sitting courtside. That's always a good thing. But what's changing?
Yeah, I think four things that are key in this shift that has happened. One is the media landscape has changed dramatically, both in terms of how media rights are actually purchased, sold, and valued, in the way in which they are transmitted. Let me just speak to this for a second. In the past, much of the sports that you watched 10 years ago, 15 years ago, disproportionately was on linear TV. And in fact, if you went back 20 years or so, a lot of the big time games, NBA finals, etc., actually were tape delayed. They weren't even carried live. And so today, absolutely. And so today what you have is, because of the rise of cord cutting and the rise of streaming, you now have media rights that cut across a number of different platforms, and people are able to customize and segmentize, if you will, the type of sports they want to receive, the way in which the coverage is given to them, and the alignment that they have with their own personal choices and views. They're no longer, to a certain degree, quote unquote, held hostage to the linear TV schedule. And so as a result, that has dramatically changed the way in which sport is both consumed and also how it is received by the customer. The second piece that has also changed is the way in which sport has now become the dominant place where people convene in a way in which the world has kind of shifted in the sense of how we are in some degree segregated by space, place, and location, where we do convene, where we do have what one would call the true town halls, is in the convening of sport. It is whether we're at a football game or a basketball game or a hockey game or soccer or what have you, people will convene for a period of time, and they will be there for that time. And so as a result, we know in a world where you have to do a lot to get people's attention, if you can go to a place where attention is already captured, now all you have to think about is what the experience needs to be. And that is a very different structure and orientation than maybe in the past. The third piece that has also changed the way in which the way in which sport has now become this new utility is, quite frankly, these enterprises are becoming a lot more expensive to run and are requiring a lot more investment and also technical expertise to be able to justify not only the valuations, but also the investments within them. Let me speak more clearly. It used to be a time where a lot of your sports franchises, to a certain degree, were kind of ran as family-owned businesses, as kind of mom and pop shops, and they were kind of handed from one generation to the next or from one set of stewardships to the next. And today, with these enterprises being worth billions, and truly being worth billions in many respects, that has required new types of capital, from private equity to sovereign wealth funds, which we both have inside Monumental, but then also the need to be able to raise those valuations as a result of the media deals that wind up driving, if you will, the way in which those valuations are structured. So from that standpoint, because you have all this new money coming in, professionalization of content becomes incredibly important, because now you have to think about how you personalize, how you customize, and how you commodify the product that you have, and the ability to transmit it in a ready form fashion for easy consumption. And then I think the last piece is the change in which fandom has also happened too as well. To be fair, currently right now, if one was to look at the number of capital outlay projects happening in the United States or even globally, they are disproportionately. I saw some stat or something of that nature that of the major capital projects that are being outlaid, roughly 1/5 of them are dedicated solely to some type of sports engagement, whether it's an arena, whether it's a coliseum, whether it's a stadium, something of that nature. And either they're building a new one, they're renovating a one, or they're changing structures in order to be able to accommodate for the rise of fandom and the needs that fans have today. Gone, Diana, are the days where, you just were happy with a pretzel and a hot dog when showing up to an event. Today, the customer respects culinary type dishes, if you will, when they come to a game. Well, that's going to require new kitchens, new preparations, new type of refrigeration. It's going to require a lot of different retooling or new tooling, if you will, to be able to deliver that. Fans are also expecting, if you will, to have premium views no matter where they sit inside an arena or in a stadium. That also changes the dynamics too as well. And then the additional piece are around in which how fans are engaged well outside of the arena. Most of the fans who follow a team will never actually be able to watch them inside an arena or a stadium. Many of them will see it online, or they'll see it in some kind of clipping, if you will, on YouTube or something of that nature. And so from that standpoint, fan engagement now is a 365 and a 360 surround orientation. So as a result, you have to be constantly thinking about positioning, brand, and sponsorship as a way of being able to carry that level of engagement and to be able to sustain it. And I should say one last thing, I know I mentioned before, but one last thing to also be mindful of is the changes that have also happened at the collegiate level for a lot of major key sports. I mean, the idea of the rise of the NIL and the rise of conferences and the media deals that conferences have struck has also driven the way in which fandom takes place. I mean, look, we had one of the most incredible moments happened inside our building at Capital One Arena. We hosted the UConn and Duke game, and for those who may recall, may remember, and I think this is not being hyperbolic. The shot of the century took place, if you will, inside our building. And for those who were Duke fans, I believe that will go on in legend in terms of the hurt and pain. And for those who were Connecticut fans, that will go on in legend in terms of the gratitude and greatness of what it meant to be a UConn fan. But the reason why I speak to these things, though, is because our building was packed to capacity. And when that shot took place, when that moment took place inside our building, there were billions of impressions that happened within the first 15 minutes because people were watching, rewatching, sharing, and rewatching, connecting. And it became this phenomenon in many respects as a result. And I just think when you have that level of eyeball grabbing and you have that level of engagement, and you have on top of that the positioning of the brands of Duke and UConn, the positionings of the brands, the companies and corporations that were a part of that, all of that now is being consumed at the highest of levels. And so as a result, I think that has also led to this change.
But on one hand, you have like this enormous interest, this enormous engagement, fans worldwide. But how do you sort of keep that and reach all these audiences where at the same time, due to cord cutting, where you have to stream all kinds of platforms and pay for all kinds of platforms to watch your team, the price of admission to things is pretty prohibitive. I mean, how do we keep fans not only engaged, but rooting for your team when it's becoming, in some ways, harder to consume, right? In terms of a game.
I think this is, you are speaking to, I think, three things that are happening in sport, which have to be figured out quite quickly. The first is, as the media landscape has begun to fragmentize, you also now have issues and dynamics in terms of the perennial, I call, question, which is, if you're a fan and you want to see your game, the first question you ask is, where do I see my game? And one of the things that we saw even in this last NCAA's championship run was that in order for you to consume a lot of the content, meaning watch a lot of the games, you had to effectively contract with multiple streaming platforms to be able to watch them. And I do think that is problematic in certain ways, because to your point, it does lead to having to have 6 or 7 different subscriptions to be able to capture all the things you need to capture. And I don't think that's ultimately, I don't think that's a great fan experience. So I do think that does need to change. We, as you know, we own our own regional network, our own regional sports network, our what's called an RSN. And so we're able to transmit our games, the Mystics games, the Wizards games, the Caps games, Go-Go, etc. And we're also able to do original content programming, as well as also carry other games like Georgetown games, etc. But for a lot of other teams and franchises like ours, they don't own their own RSN. So they don't own the ability to transmit their own IP. And so as a result, they're at the whims of distributors. And depending on how many games they may be able to have on national broadcasts or not, and other dynamics that, quite frankly, are somewhat out of their control, the ability for the fan to be able to keep up and be able to keep track and be able to follow is difficult. And so I do think that has to definitely change. And we do believe that it is better for those who are responsible for the local media rights, like we have, to be able to provide and work with distributors to provide those games. And we think that it's a big deal, so that therefore you don't have what we would call individuals picking how fans can basically follow their local team. That should never kind of be a situation. And unfortunately, I think in some areas that is actually happening. I think the second piece that's also happening too as well is, to your point, the rise in costs of just being able to attend a game or a function. And look, and you hear it across the board. I was at a meeting a couple of days ago, or a conference a couple of days ago, and people were talking about the cost of the FIFA tickets, just being able to attend the World Cup and all the dynamics and how to get there and everything like that. We know that that's also an issue and a concern that's likely going to rise with the Olympics in 2028 in LA. LA just in general is an expensive place. And so one has to kind of think about, well, how do you make that so that the everyday person, or what we would call a more pedestrian opportunity exists, if you will, for the fan. I think for us here at Capital One Arena, and then also here in terms of the way in which we're thinking about it, is you have to look at the way in which you are blending the ability to provide premium support and services and suites and all those kind of things with the exact same time allowing for the everyday fan to be able to have access. And what we've tried to do is do a multi-tier way of thinking through both the pricing, the structures, and also try to create a number of different arrangements to allow for people to consistently be a part of the activity if they are coming in person, whether that be payment plans, etc. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing it, and also, quite frankly, allowing for tickets to be discounted, and, accordingly in reference to that. And so I do think all those are tools at the disposals of franchise instructors like ourselves to be able to do that. It also is available to us because we have multiple properties. So we have the ability to look across the different properties as a platform company and be able to think about how we can rightly position to ensure that we're keeping in track so that the everyday fan in whether it be DC, Virginia, or Maryland, or if they're traveling from out of state, are able to participate. I do think the third thing that leads to this in terms of affordability and access is ultimately you want to ensure that you're never losing engagement. And the best way to see that is to think about how fan engagement should be at the center of the decisions that you make. And so if we are, say, for instance, thinking about a new engagement that we're looking to participate in, how do we drive fandom in that? So I'll give you a great example. We, as you probably saw, are the official partner with IndyCar, and we are bringing the first race ever in the history of the country, IndyCar race in the history of the country, to Washington, D.C. So there will be cars zooming around Washington, D.C., 170 miles an hour. They have, 4 tight turns and everything like that. And there's going to be epic pictures and images going to come from that. But the first question we asked ourselves, and we partnered with IndyCar around this, was how do we ensure that we are driving the greatest element of fandom? And we all agreed the tickets for that should be free. So anybody who comes to the mall, anybody who comes out and wants to see this race for the first time, they can do that and access it for free. And we think that that is great. Sure, we will have opportunities for suites and suite sales for people who want to have all of that and those things, but the everyday fan will not be chilled, if you will, because they can't access the ability to see it. This is ultimately what sports franchises should provide, is the ability for fans to be able to be engaged and to allow for them to continue their opportunity to follow whatever their favorite sport or their favorite activity or their favorite player may be.
So I imagine that you tell me, you're you
Sure.
know way more than I do. But on one hand, you've got this, you as the sports franchise need to do direct engagement with the fans, opportunities like that. And then you're partnering with brands. So are the brands, I imagine, what are the different opportunities or challenges that coming with this? I mean, the brands enabling that, or you have to pay more to pay the brands, or it's a lot.
No, the world is a great question. The world of sponsorships and partnerships is exploding right now. Let me give you a statistic that's going to probably blow your mind. So last year in 2025, $70 billion was spent in brand sponsorships in sport. By 70 billion. By 2030, that number will be 95 to 96 billion. So so if you think about it, that's roughly about a 6% CAGR or KIGR, depending on however people want to use it. But just think about that. That's 6% in terms of growth. There's very few industries that are growing at that rate. And what that means is that there's just more and more resources being poured into sport because brands are now recognizing in order for us to get in front of the consumer or the audience that we want to be in front of, and for us to be able to brand ourselves with what one would call a high value asset, whether it be a team, whether it be an arena, that this is the place to be able to do it. And you can really do a lot of great KPIs against your revenue spend. That tends to be a lot harder sometimes when you're doing it, say, for instance, more on like a linear TV structure, or if you're just doing it on more, I would call more traditional methods in terms of using using non-sport assets to be able to advertise your brand. And this has also been something that's been growing for the new leagues and also for the women's leagues too as well. So when one thinks about it, some of the new leagues that are emerging, there's the Women's National Hockey League, and there are new sponsors that are pouring into that. We actually hosted Women's National Hockey game actually here at Capital One Arena, and we set an attendance record in the country as a result of that. And so people recognize that when there is high value, high intensity, and high engagement, that is the place you want to ultimately be. And the consistency is also taking place in terms of brands. Brands are now recognizing that these partnerships have an arc to them that has a longer staying power than if they were on some of the more traditional marketing methods. That is why, I mean, I'm sure you probably saw this. I can think about even my former employer. They are advertising at sports entities, whether it's at college football games or other types of structures or what have you. They're going where the audience and where their structures are lying. I think the other piece that you should appreciate is I think about the WNBA, and just last year, that the growth in terms of sponsorship has went up 413%. And you are starting to see, and we see it even in our portfolio, where we have a lot of times first time companies coming in and wanting to sponsor our WNBA team, the Mystics team. A good example of that actually was one of my former employers, Vanda Pharmaceuticals. They had never did any advertising with sports or quite frankly with any kind of sports structure ever. And yet today they are the jersey sponsor and also one of our key sponsors here at Monumental and specifically for the Mystics. And so that has been something, and they've seen great value as a result of that. So being identified with some of these sports assets really allows for you to have visibility in places you wouldn't have otherwise. And then the last, and I would be remiss not to say this, look, we're in the nation's capital. And so not only are you getting the asset of these great teams and these great values that come with these teams, but you also are in a place where the people who come into our buildings are the most important people running the country. I mean, we position ourselves as the most important arena in the world. And the reason why is because if you even think about most recent, a couple of years ago, when the inauguration had to be switched indoors, it came to Capital One Arena. And we had the highest levels of officials across the world in our arena. We also had the most wealthiest individuals across the world in our arena. And we also had the highest level of, one would call, people who are responsible for running various aspects of the country. All in our arena, all at one time in a controlled space. That just doesn't happen in other places. And I think from that standpoint, if you're a brand and you were there for that or for any of these other activities, you have maximum exposure to people who you might also want to get in front of or to be able to engage your product, whether you're everybody from Robinhood all the way down to Capital One or what have you. And so we do think that those are great values and great opportunities.
I want to return to two things that you mentioned.
Yes.
First, with the new interest on the sponsorship side in women's sports. Is that because the nature of women's sports, because of the newfound popularity and exposure of women's sports, or is it because it's has a lower barrier to entry?
Well, I think it is to a certain degree still the WNBA teams, from a valuation standpoint, are not are lower in valuation than that of the NBA teams. And so from that standpoint, if you wanted to think about how you could maximize dollars, it's probably easier to go in and sponsor a WNBA team or be a part of a patch of a jersey from that standpoint. That being said, I do want to say engagement and also influencership is at the height, if you will, in the WNBA. I'll give you an example. I remember I was telling a friend of mine when I first got here, there were a number of fashion brands who reached out and wanted to, and we're talking about how they could be a part of dressing or connecting, if you will, with WNBA players for the tunnel walk, right? Because, and you're starting to see this, where if you're a fashion brand and you can dress, said WNBA player in your fashion gear, and that person is being invited into people's households season after season, multiple times a year, that a level of impression and influence you just cannot pay for that in any other way. And so from that standpoint, there's great value in being able to do that. The other piece that I think is there too is even for traditional sport viewers. So let's say for instance, your soccer viewers. So 62% of all the people who view soccer, also who view soccer in general, follow women's soccer. So just from that standpoint, but within that group, 1 out of 4 follow women's soccer exclusively. And that number is only going to continue to grow. And so what you also are seeing is women's sports and women's sports leagues are the fastest in terms of growth ascension too as well. And that has been reinforced by the recent valuations you probably saw come out in CNBC and also in Sportico, showing the rise, if you will, of the WNBA teams in terms of their valuations that are growing. So there's that. I think the last piece I will say is that companies are now understanding, and there's been a lot of studies that have been done on this, that if you are a sponsor, particularly of a women's sports league or something of that nature, that is more identifiable and customers are more likely to buy your product as a result. Now, it has to be some level of authenticity, right? So you have to have that sense of connectivity. But for the most part, there's great halo value in sponsoring and being a part of a women's sports league or a women's sports team, and thus supporting that league and that growth, and that in which your customer base also is following and tracking to as well.
You mentioned some pretty high numbers, billions of dollars, and all the activities, like everything that goes on at a game here. We took friends, we had our meeting in Chicago in our global summit in Chicago in October. We took friends from the UK to a Bulls game. Yes. And like their heads were exploding, right? We had dancers and competitions, and there was no moment of quiet at a Bulls game. Is this an American phenomenon? I mean,
no, it's truly a global phenomenon. I mean, all you have to do, I travel a lot to the Middle East and also to Asia. A part of that is because we have an incredible partner in the Middle East at Monumental with QIA, the Qatar Investment Authority. There's the Sovereign Wealth Fund. They are investors in our company, and they've been incredible partners. And they believe very strongly that being the country of Qatar, and also quite frankly the Middle East, whether you think about the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and other countries there within, the Middle East believes very strongly in the rise of sport. And you see that in the effort of fandom. When I was in Qatar, in fact, Ted Leonsis and I were, and also some of our other executives were all in Qatar.
And I'm sorry, Ted's your owner, correct?
Ted is
Monumental.
Ted is the founder and owner of Monumental, yes. And so we were all in Qatar together. And when we landed, Qatar was hosting the Formula One race. And just before we landed there, the Formula One race was in Abu Dhabi. And so you're just seeing this rise, and the fandom was was incredible. I mean, the number of people, celebs, everything of that nature you could imagine was just as if it was being held in the Hollywood glitz as it was in Doha. And similarly situated while we were there were 5 major conferences going on at the exact same time in the Middle East region. There was the Milken Conference that was happening at that time. There was the Sportico Conference happening at that time. The Wall Street Journal was having their tech conference at that time. So there was all of these things that were all happening. So to me, no, it's really a global phenomenon. And then I also took time last year, Zach Leonsis, Ted's son, and also president of our media division, we were in Cannes together. And while we were there last year, there was Monaco's basketball team was having a game. And so I happened to I was like, you know what, let me go see what a basketball game in Monaco looks like, and how does it match up? And it was amazing to see people outside marching before the game, cheering their team on. And when you got inside, it was everything. It was all of the aspects that you would think of an NBA game in terms of whether it was dancers, whether it was games, whether it was prizes, it was engagement, fans were cheering. And so to me, that is really a global phenomenon. It is not something that's uniquely American at all. And I would almost say, I think that what Americans are now learning from the global space is this more wider reaching aspect of fandom too as well. And I say this as an example. We have an esports team called Team Liquid, and they play on a number of different titles, I think 14 titles. But one of the more recent ones we added was chess. And we have 2 of the
chess, but e-chess? You lost me here,
exactly.
AJ.
We have chess,
okay, all right.
We have chess and e-chess. We started with e-chess, right? So if you remember during COVID, the Queen's Gambit and all that kind of stuff, all these things were rising as a result, and it gave the rise to not only more people playing esports in terms of chess, but then also wanting to play live in terms of chess. And so our esports team actually competed recently and wound up winning championships over in Riyadh last year. And they came in second to Team Falcon, which is the team from Saudi Arabia. The reason why I bring that up, though, if I could have transported you in watching esports games happening, it was as if it was another Super Bowl, and people were there. And let me be clear, there's real money to be made in esports for the players, right? And so I just think that, and to me, you have players who are playing all over the world, who are practicing and who are in teams all over the world, and they're convening and they're engaging, and that engagement continues well outside of the games. And I think what American sports followers are learning is that engagement really isn't only when things are in season. It happens all throughout the arc, if you will, of a team or of a franchise you may be connecting with.
One more question I want to touch on. And every question we have here is that we discuss is like just a little touch. We could have a separate podcast on each of those. So this is like the overview. Athletes, I don't have to tell you, are brands now, right?
Yes.
And I imagine that has a lot of clout. They have a lot, but it also, they are their own people, correct? Right?
Sure.
I mean, so there's a lot of management, I imagine, from a team perspective or franchise perspective. Just the layers must be huge in terms of outreach, fans, platforms, entertainment blogs.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know what I'm asking, but it's a lot.
Sure. Look, I think I would say 3 things to that. I think being an athlete today is probably more challenging than it ever has been in the history of being athletes. I mean, I as a person who's not a pro athlete, but is sitting adjacent to a lot of it, whether you're in college, and I can say a little bit of this. I've seen. I think I shared with you my younger son actually is a swimmer at American University. Which is a D1 school. He swims the breaststroke there, and I saw just in his rise when he was a little kid, all the way up to wanting to swim at the collegiate level, just the level of specialization and camps and all these things that have to happen in order for you to then make it into that space. And then when you're into that space, there's then the next level of being great at that level at the collegiate side. And with, again, the rise of NILs and everything of that nature, you now as a college student are a walking brand for the institution and for the school. And not that you weren't that before, but it's way more visible today than it ever has been before. And you now can have sponsorship deals while you're in school. And so brands are now tied to you. And then you get selected and get picked. And I went to the WNBA draft last year when we drafted Kiki Ephraim and Georgia, and also we drafted Sonia Citron. And so, and seeing and watching, for instance, the moment that they are drafted into the league and all of the aspects that come with, now you're a WNBA player and it's showing up for this and taking pictures here and fandom here. I mean, there's a lot that goes into all those aspects, and there's a lot of management that I think on the player side that one has to think about. I think for those of us who are on the team side, on the franchise side, we do our necessary supports to be able to ensure that they have all the accesses and resources that they have. But then more importantly, we're communicating and that we're also doing things that are accretive to their brand. Let's be clear. The more valuable their brands are being on our team, the more valuable our team is. And so they have to work in some level of synchronicity, and we want to be really thoughtful around how they show up. It also means we have to be very protective, if you will, of our players too as well. And so being thoughtful and working with the various comms and marketing structures that are around the team, and also obviously engaging at times with their agents just to make sure that there's a brand representation, that's alignment that's there, is also important. And all those are not that those are new things, but I would say to you, those are things that have a much higher level of intensity and scrutiny involved with them than they have before, just because of just the values that are all kind of tied up into it. I think the third thing I would say, just in reference to it, is you also are seeing a lot more players who are already thinking, hey, post my play career, what am I going to be building and branding myself as? And you're seeing some of that. And a lot of the players nowadays, they have their own production houses. It used to be some players who would rely on a PR agency or rely on an advertising agency or rely on a brand agency to be able to help them build their brand. Now, most of these players are doing that on their own. A good example would be, like LeBron James. He has a number of different structures that he's brought into place, ultimately to allow for him to control his brand. And whether that's Spring Hill or other types of things that allow for him to produce movies and platforms and shows, or that is, in my opinion, the future where some of these things are going to be going. And he's not the only one. Steph Curry does the same thing. As you probably saw, he had a show last year with CNBC in terms of the business of sport. So I think all those things are going to only continue.
So I know you have a big job. It's a hard job. You've got all kinds of challenges going on, and our listeners cannot watch you the way I'm able to now, but you are clearly exuding fandom here, AJ. You just love
absolutely,
like you absolutely. are your target, right?
Absolutely. No, I mean, look, I have the great blessing and fortune, and I do mean blessing. Is I wake up every day in my responsibility in many respects is the way in which some of the most highest and incredibly talented individuals in the world are able to do what they do and bring both joy and excitement and enthusiasm into people's lives. And it is ephemeral. It is fleeting. It is episodic. When I first started here, my first week was Alex Ovechkin tying the record of Wayne Gretzky. I mean, I was able to personally be a part of that and also be responsible for the work that went into it. And I just think that for so many of us, we often don't get a chance to really work in the worlds in which we dream about. and I've been able to do that. The first game that I ever took my boys to, I have two sons, the first basketball game, professional basketball game they ever went to was when we were here in Washington, D.C., and I took them to a Wizards game towards the end of Michael Jordan's career. And they didn't really know who Michael Jordan was, right? And those they were too young.
You did, Dad
but
did.
I did. And so for me to be full circle today, it just means a lot. And I just think it's there. And I think about just all the things that we're able to deliver and be a part of. So yeah, I can only be enthusiastic about it because again, there's just the excitement of everything that's happening. As I mentioned before, when we first started, I mean, look, Sunday is Mother's Day, and that's an important and sacred thing. It is also for me the NBA draft lottery day, and it's also the
also
opening
important and sacred.
Absolutely, also important and sacred, and it's also our Mystics first home game against the New York Liberty, right? And so I think, I mean, when one has to think about the choices of the worlds, I have an abundance of blessing to be able to be a part of. So thank you for recognizing that. But yeah, these smiles are authentic, and this energy is that as well.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Well, I look forward to continuing this conversation. This was a great starter.
Same.
But I can feel it, and I thank you, AJ.
Absolutely. Thank you so much again, Diana.
You've been listening to the Provoke Podcast, brought to you by Provoke Media and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers.